what are the tipping points or timelines associated with each of our life support systems on Earth? In other words, how much time do we realistically have? How much time do we realistically have before the world is not livable or the way we live now? Do we have 100 years? Do we have 50 years? Do we have much less? How much time do we have if we keep going the way we're going?
Yeah, I'd like Dr. Rao to answer it more, and Glenn about climate change. I mean, I know quite a bit about climate change, but I'd like them to answer that. I can tell you very quickly about the other tipping points, the 9 boundaries, but we'll focus on maybe the 6 that we've already, we have passed tipping points. We've passed, we will not see it reversed in our lifetime for some of these tipping points. The difference is, Stephen, instead of life becoming continually worsened, we can turn it around so that even though we've lost numerous species, we'll never see them again. It's right now averaging between 1,000 to 10,000 per year. That's that's probably, it's about 10,000 times the background rate, which used to be about 2 to 4 years. So it could be up to 40,000 species a year. It's difficult to tell because we don't know how many species are even in the Amazon, rainforest. So in any event, tipping points have already been reached with biodiversity loss, land use, the ones that I mentioned earlier on. But we can turn it around. The statement was made, by a number of organizations, and those discussing it, that we're going to lose all fish in our oceans by the year 2048. That's an extrapolation of a study that was done by Boris Worm in 2006, and that's not necessarily true. But what he meant to say is that all commercially recognized, the fish that are recognized commercially that we're fishing today, which is not the full spectrum of all biodiversity in our oceans, it's likely that those will be nearly exhausted by the year 2048, and that is we're on target to do that right now. So I think the tipping points that are most involved right now that we can do something about right in front of us are the ones that are related to we're already past the land use, but we can stop all deforestation today just by stopping deforestation, because we don't need to take down any more forests, because we don't need to use forests to turn them into pastures and farmland to increase livestock for us to eat. We don't need that. We've already proven that. We've showed that, and Dr. Rao and Glenn can talk more about that. We also don't need to take any fish out of our oceans. So that tipping point for the species that remain can be stopped. I mean, we can stop the tipping point for all the other species. So the rainforest, the forest deforestation, the oceans, well, we can certainly stop. We can increase freshwater scarcity. It doesn't have to be where there's going to be a 40% shortage by the year 2030. If we just stop using this tremendous inefficiencies that we have right now for water usage, getting back to that burger that family was eating that you're saying that, it would require sometimes up to 2,000 gallons to produce that, that quarter-pound burger. So we can reverse that out. And so those are some of the tipping points that I think are in front of us that we can tip out. I do want to say one last thing before I pass it over about the oceans. It's really important to understand that those forces at play that you mentioned it with your first question, Stephen, it seems insurmountable, but we can get through those. But some of the forces at play in our oceans in terms of loss of biodiversity really are they're managing our oceans in the sense that they're looking at fish in one of two ways. The first way is that you need to view fish as they're either wild animals, which they are, that we should leave their number pre-human. Like, we shouldn't be slaughtering off any animal. We should leave them in balance from the time that 40,000 years ago. But that's not the way we're viewing it. The second way that we're viewing it is the way that the fishing industry is, that's dictating policy, and the $35 billion a year we're handing out in subsidies for the fishing industry. And that is that fish is a resource. It's a food commodity. the levels, therefore, instead of being a wild animal that we should leave alone because even they feel pain, they, all the other things we've talked about and we'll talk more about tomorrow. It's a commodity, a food commodity or resource. So the levels can fluctuate according to the fishing industry by our consumption rate, and which is completely backwards. So all we have to do is stop that thinking, because they're also putting this maximum sustainable yield, which is how much we can take out of our oceans based on what the populations want to eat. And so it's completely backwards. But once we change that philosophical base and do it on a public knowledge standpoint and then a policy making standpoint, and redirect subsidies and then find jobs for the 39 million, just redirect them, with all the money that we talked about earlier, with new job creation, then we can stop that tipping point in our oceans. So there's a lot of hope for that, but I want to hear what they have to say about climate change, I guess.
Yeah, in terms of just looking at the total biomass of wild animals and wild vertebrates, we are, they've been going down exponentially. Okay, so if I look at that I think is much more near term than anything else. So rather than looking at extinction rates, extinction is when an entire species is gone. So you can keep one tiger alive for 50 years and pretend that the tiger is not extinct for 50 years. But that doesn't mean that the tiger population is healthy, that it's going to come back. So we reach functional extinction much, much sooner than actual extinction, species extinctions. So functional extinction meaning the population is no longer viable to continue. And there are so many species that are going to reach that within the next few years. They're already probably, a lot of them have already reached it, okay? Mm-hmm. This is why I say it is such an urgent issue, because between 1970 and 2010, we wiped out 52% of the wild vertebrate biomass in terms of total weight. And that became 58% by 2012 and 68% by 2016. So you can look at that trend line and see how fast we are wiping them out. And you will see that by 2026, they're pretty much going to be all gone. Okay. So this is why I say it's much more urgent than looking at, say, 2048 as a number, because those are all based on, keeping a few alive. And so those are not viable populations. So we have to look at functional extinction. We have to look at wiping them out, basically wiping out 30 million acres of forests every year is not sustainable beyond a few years. The biomass of wild animals, they cannot survive anymore. Okay, so this is why I say, folks, this is much more urgent than you think. That we need to we need to become more active as vegans to convince our friends and family that this is the wave of the future. You are joining something new, okay? That this is the wave of the future. And guess what? I can feed you. I will start giving you my food. I think we need to start all cooking food and giving it away to our friends and family. And that's what I've been doing here. And to me, it is much more, a loving way of bringing them in, as opposed to shaking our fingers at them and pointing out how bad things are.
Yeah, Stephen, one quick thing in addition to what Dr. Al just said is that, a landmark study came out by the IPBES. It's like it's a panel about biodiversity, ecosystem loss, and it was only just a year and a half ago. And it was a landmark study. It was the most complete, exhaustive study that was by 300 to 400 scientists about biodiversity. And their findings were that we were going to have over 1 million, not just animals, because we've been talking about animals, not just animals, but over 1 million plant and animal species, which are vitally needed as well. Obviously, it's this interconnected set of ecosystems and this web that we have on Earth that we need to take care of just in the next 2 decades. So their prediction is, and that's probably pretty conservative, over 1 million species of plants and animals combined that are going to be extinct in the next couple of decades. So I agree that we need to, those are some of the timelines still that we're looking at, but I agree we need to bring everybody in at a tolerable level, but I think it's necessary to let different people know on different levels, especially educationally, as we said earlier, about this. I mean, there are ways to do this without necessarily pointing your finger, as Dr. Rao said, or creating nightmares at night. There's optimism in this because we've created the damage and we can create the solutions.
When it comes to timelines, I'll make an analogy to the book, The Population Bomb by Paul Ehrlich, which was published in 1968. And Ehrlich predicted that we were on a path to having such a high population that there would be massive famines, I think he said, within 20 years or so. That didn't happen in part because of the Green Revolution, which was a way of growing more food using heavily chemically intensive agriculture, which caused other problems. We did avoid the famine that Ehrlich predicted, but we wound up with ocean dead zones and with degraded land and so forth. Well, now the population is almost 8 billion. And I think that since Ehrlich wrote the book, the population of the world has probably almost tripled. So does anyone really believe that in another 50 years, we'll be able to sustain 24 billion people, right? So he may have been wrong in the timeline that he gave in that book, but he was essentially right in his underlying principle that we have to pay some attention to population. So I would make the point that I don't think anybody can predict the timeline too well of exactly when, we're all going to die. When we've gone so far that the climate's going to be unlivable, the planet's going to be unlivable, and it will be the end, at least, of human life on Earth and many other species with us. So I think the more important thing is to have an attitude of humility. It's arrogant to take the attitude that we can figure this out, we could know how long we have, we can come up with a technological solution. So we can figure out that we've got 65 years and we'll come up with a technological solution in 35 years or something. We can't take that attitude. All of life is at stake. We have to use the precautionary principle here and value life and realize it's not so important to know exactly when we're going to hit these tipping points. These are nonlinear systems that are impossible to predict, really. What's important to understand is the process. What is the process that's causing the destruction? And then how do we reverse that process? And so much of that is obvious that even a layman like me was able to understand it. The process is that we are doing the most inefficient and destructive thing in the world in order to feed ourselves. And so that's the process that we have to reverse. And that is what's doing the lion's share of the damage. And so I'll decline predicting exactly when we're going to hit all these tipping points. I'll just say that we have to know that that isn't the ultimate question. The ultimate question is, how do we reverse the processes?
Hey, can I make one quick comment? Because I think it's really important to understand this from an educational standpoint, where the audience can go with it even. I think the tipping points, first of all, we have hit them. So I've got to disagree with Glenn pretty strongly about that. They're very clear.
Excuse me, I think Steve was talking about the climate tipping point, or at least that.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. But then let's revert back then. That's good. A good clarification. That I think this is part of the educational process that we have to set forth, either for policymakers or the general public as a whole. But I think it's really important that somewhere along the line they have to know that it is, and going back to a short statement that Glenn made, but it isn't a human population problem. It's the footprint. It's not how many people we have on the planet. today or the 9.8 billion predicted in 2050, we're not going to cull other humans. We're not going to have some mandated population control. And it's proven that it's not the math is there. It's the footprint we have. So I think that's what we have to start with. Even my little grandson at 3 years old knew about a footprint, about a resource footprint, that this took too much water to do this, or, without setting some type of large frustration mode or psychological, damage to them. They have to start understanding that there's a footprint. That's what we all have to understand, that, because the tipping points are here. Many of them are here. Many of them are past for all the different areas of global depletion. And so the issue is how to switch things around, lessen it, try to make it a more favorable, harmonious, rejuvenated Earth from when we all inherited it, by reducing our footprint. And the easiest way to reduce our footprint is through what we put in our mouths, and that's and the agricultural systems that produce those. And that's what I think everybody has to hear, see, and it has to be in conjunction with some incentivizing. It does. I mean, because of the timelines we're on, we can't have, Jane Goodall and I had this discussion years ago that she thought that, bless her heart, that you just, when everybody can get around to it, it's just whenever the individual can. Well, no, it can't be when everybody gets around to it, because it's too late. And yet, if you, it's got to be a balance of what Dr. Rao said initially at the onset about, finding a spiritual enlightenment to make sure that you're in harmony with those natural Earth support systems that support all of us, and doing it so it's within your understanding and grasp and in a positive manner. But it also has to be with industries and policymakers and businesses understanding that there's more at stake here, and there's got to be a way to and I know that there's a way to incentivize it. So anyway, I hope that helps.
I'll just say that I don't really disagree with anything that Richard just said. I too focus on the same things that Richard focuses on in terms of the solution. And I think that we can sustain our population if we have the correct diet. At the same time, I also believe that all problems get more difficult to solve if the population keeps doubling. And so I was bringing up the population bomb by way of analogy, that he had made a specific prediction of a specific timeline, and that's where he got in trouble. And that his overall thesis that eventually population can't keep doubling forever, I think will be proven out to be correct.